Hey everyone, Chris Lewis from the Fox 47 Digital Newsroom, and today we are at the Library of Michigan again for our Michigan History Throwback, and we're talking with Tim Gleisner about family history. And it's Family History Month, so we are talking about what you can do to better understand your family history, what you can do to be able to get ready to look at the skeletons in your own closet.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, that's right. Skeletons in the closet is a good theme, especially for this time of year. But as you stated, it is Family History Month, and here at the Library of Michigan, we've been collecting the history of the state since 1828. And so I've pulled out of various publications throughout what we call our Michigan collection. Last two times we were in the rare book collection, but today I've decided to take us downstairs to the Michigan collection, where we collect all published materials from the state of Michigan, be it magazines, be it books, newspapers. We'll see it all today, or at least selections of it all. And I started out with two publications here in our Michigan Government Documents collection. And let me start with everything that we're going to see today. If there are two copies, you can check one of them out, either here at the Library of Michigan or mailcat it to your area library, and we can send these items out. Now, the items we saw before were in our rare book room, but today here in our Michigan collection, again, if there are two copies of the material, you can check these out. So first, just to start with, I decided, because of the recent groundbreaking for the police memorial directly across the street from us here, I would pull out a magazine from approximately 1923. And the reason why I pulled this out, Chris, is because this was the State Trooper magazine. And this happens to be an article on the Michigan State Police head Vander Cook, who resigned at that time and had formed at that time the State Police organization. And so he gave up his command. And so basically, this material and materials like it are materials that we've been collecting again since the inception of the Library of Michigan. Now, just next to it, I pulled out one of my favorite pieces of all time, right? So this, again, remember, this is a Michigan government document. Why is this a Michigan government document? Because this is the magazine from 1933 called American Prisoner from the Jackson State Penitentiary. So why do I pull these items out? Because your ancestors might have been a state trooper. They might have been a prisoner in the Jackson State Penitentiary. But the reason why it's great is because this gives you context into your relative's story, right? Into your ancestor's story. Be they a state trooper or a prisoner, or quite frankly, maybe your family is so varied that you have both, a state trooper and a prisoner. But we have all these materials, be it these or road magazines from the 19-teens and 1920s, all showing the different aspects of life. Some of it is indexed, some of it is not. And so with these publications that we have here, if your ancestor happened to be, again, in Jackson State Penitentiary or in the state police force in the 1920s, we might have aspects of your family's history, as well as all the city directories and newspapers, which we'll see in just a little bit.
Is there a way for people to easily be able to search to try to find a name, to get information, so they can make that process a bit simpler?
It's a really good question, Chris. I mean, really it depends on your relative, and in some cases easier than others. So the most obvious source that I would look at right away, and we have a subscription for Ancestry here at the Library of Michigan, and that's the Ancestry database. And the only reason I mention that is census records. So no matter where you are in the United States, every 10 years you're tabulated. Now, of course, these census takers, they might spell the names wrong. So like my last name, Gleisner, at least 5 different variations of the spelling of name Gleisner, and it could be with one S, two S's, could just be with an E, could be with an I, but really it depends. And I'd say the most obvious choice is that. Now, if you know where your ancestor was residing, city directories might be a great clue, because city directories, in many cases, like the Polk city directories, which many communities had, you can find your ancestor in there by address or by name, and then also on top of it, you can find their occupation, which will give you a hint as to where they were working at that time, and sometimes even give you the company name. But really, it depends on the locale, depends on your ancestor. If your ancestor wasn't in the United States, say, pre-1940, And that's possible. It might be a little harder because the 1950 census hasn't been released yet. And that has to do with the Census Bureau of the United States government only releasing those documents, I believe, every 72 years. So things like that, if you know basic information, if your family was here, you can definitely find information on your family. And there are other databases as well, right? So if your family might not be in the United States pre-1940, you might want to look at a database like Family Search. And Family Search is through the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. And so, like, I know for a fact that the Mexican census, maybe not all of it, but a good part of it is on Family Search. So really it's going to depend. But here at the Library of Michigan, what we really focus on is Michigan. We look at the two peninsulas. We look at everything from Monroe up to Ontonagon. So if your ancestor happens to be in this state, there's a possibility that we might have a newspaper, we might have a book, we might have a document that relates to their lives somehow in some portion of their lives. So Chris, just, we showed you the Michigan collection, and this is a portion of the Michigan collection, a very large portion. This actually happens to be the newspaper collection. What I have open right here is the drawer for the Lansing portion of our collection, and this just happens to be a portion of the Lansing newspapers. All totaled for the city of Lansing, we have 44 different titles for the city of Lansing. Now, in the state of Michigan as a whole, we also have a newspaper representing almost every county in the state. So all 83 counties have at least one newspaper representing their portion of the county. Now, for many of these newspapers, we have indexes, not all of them. So again, going back to your original question about how do I find my ancestor if they're in the newspaper, it's possible that we have an obituary index. It's possible that we have a name or subject index on some of these newspapers. And some, like the Detroit papers, are digitized, and we have that available for the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News. But again, this happens to be the Lansing newspapers that you can look through. If we have 2 copies of these reels, you can again have these sent out. So if you're living in the greater Lansing area through Melcat, if you don't want to come down here, we can send it out to one of the branches at the Capital Area District Library through that service called Melcat. And you can find out if we have 2 copies because they're all available on our catalog called answercat.org. So just to show you, Chris, what's great about this collection is we don't just collect the large newspapers like the Lansing State Journal. This is actually called the Lansing Auto Worker, and its name is really quite evident. For all the auto factories in this area, the auto workers of this area had their own newspaper. And so we collect even newspapers like that. And this happens to be from 1937. And this is a newspaper article called GM Double Cross Arouses Workers. So obviously very sympathetic to the workers, possibly published by the workers themselves. But for all the localities in the state, in all 83 counties, we don't collect just newspapers that are dealing with, the big headlines of the day. We're also collecting newspapers that collect the daily record of the day. In this case, the largest industry in Lansing outside of state government was the automotive industry. And this newspaper right here from 1937 is indicative of many of the newspapers that we have here, like the Detroit Times, the African-American paper out of that city, the Grand Rapids Herald, which was a defunct newspaper but was really the socialite paper for that city. Again, all those newspapers, including all 44 titles here on Lansing, in the city of Lansing, are available here at the Library of Michigan. And you can print these articles off, or you can email them to yourself or save them to a thumb drive. All of that is available here in our microfilm room. And yes, we still handle microfilm because a lot of it we can't even digitize because of copyright, because of restrictions with ownership. And that's fine, but they're all available here. And if you're looking for an article or an obituary on a relative, again, a lot of these newspapers, perhaps not the Lansing Auto Worker, but many of them are digitized, and we can send those articles or obituaries even straight to your house. So Chris, not only newspapers and not only the magazines, but obviously the books. And I've pulled just a couple items out here, and we could spend all day in the books. But this happens to be one of my favorites, and this is just really the depth of the collections here at the Library of Michigan. Again, all able to check out. And this book happens to be one called The Stronger Kinship by Annalisa Cox. It was published about 12 years ago. Again, we have books going all the way back to the 1820s, if not further back. But we also have books more contemporary, and this one happens to be be a history of a small town by South Haven called Covert, Michigan. So not only do we collect like the tragedies, like a GM auto strike, but we also collect things that are like a hopeful story like this. And this is A Stronger Kinship, which was published, again, 12 years ago. And it was about this small town Covert, which is one of the few integrated towns from the 1850s onwards all the way to today, basically telling the story of this town that's located in southwest Michigan. People, black and white, all living together, marrying, electing African-American officials as early as the 1850s here in the state of Michigan, and really just tells a story and gives a depth to the state story that otherwise we wouldn't be able to tell if we didn't have materials like this. So we hear a lot about segregation, and it's true, it happened, but and so with books like this and items like this throughout our collections on almost every locality within Michigan, it gives a real depth to the research for anybody who's looking for their ancestry. Now, another one I pulled, not so much a fictional work, but this one happens to be the Detroit College of Business yearbook. So not only do we collect, your typical book that's being published, but we also collect published items like this that gives, obviously a snapshot. So if you know if your ancestor graduated from a Michigan college or a Michigan university, we probably have an item like this in here. And this is the Detroit College of Business from 1965. We have other materials in here. I had one lady who came in one day, and she was from Detroit originally, living in Kalamazoo, and she was looking for a piece of material on Detroit Polish photographers. And honestly, when she came in, I didn't think I could help her. But after a quick search on our catalog at answercat.org, we were able to find something. We found a book, a volume on Detroit Polish photographers. And again, going back to that whole depth of collections, we even have books in here on African-American women's clubs. We had a researcher from Ypsilanti. So we have researchers from all over the state coming here because really we're kind of your one-stop source on information from around the state of Michigan.